Hey everyone, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, that website is theclinicaltrialsguru.com. I'm here with Dawn. We're interviewing Sarah Seagler. You won't see her, but you can hear her voice. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Sarah's a longtime friend of the show, and this is probably our third interview. I think, and she's got a lot to discuss. There's been a lot that's been going on since the last time we've had in one of these interviews. And Sarah, for those of you that don't know, I'll probably let her introduce herself. But she used to work for Ohio State University in the research department, and she discovered some things that I guess they were not being compliant in certain instances, and Sarah's been dealing with court and things like that, and she's going to tell you a lot more about it, and then we're going to get into a lot of different topics around research, specifically the new things going on with the drug shortages. But we'll let Sarah cover that because she is the expert and the guest guru today. So, Sarah, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me back as always. It's an absolute pleasure to be interviewed by you guys. And
Thank
I love your diplomatic explanation of my situation with
you. Yeah,
Ohio State. I like that. That's a good way to put it. I think we can leave it at that.
I made.
Litigation is pending, we can say.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't
But
sure how much you wanted to get into with that, so I kind of left it pretty safe there in my introduction. But what would you like to share for those people who may have never seen any of our interviews with you? What exactly? Can you just reintroduce your situation?
Okay, so I am a former employee of the Ohio State University's Department of Pathology. I was working in clinical trials, specifically the federally funded
Ah.
cancer clinical trials for the Cancer and Leukemia Group B.
Hmm.
Over the course of my employment, I came across some issues, including a drug shortage issue pertaining to chemotherapy that I felt, were issues of great concern, and also there were issues of noncompliance in terms of, my position at Ohio State. And so I came forward with my concerns about all of these things and was subsequently terminated for coming forward. And as a result, I have filed lawsuits now in both state and federal court to try and seek some remedy from what happened as a result of my coming forward with the so-called whistleblower disclosures.
Yeah. Now, can you give us the? I know we've probably discussed this before, but for the new viewers, maybe the biggest, I guess, issue of non-compliance that you reported on, that your former employer. Um,
Well, I think there would be several, but the main issue goes back to, I guess, the allocation and distribution of federal funding
okay.
within the federally funded cancer clinical trials and the research that happens in conjunction with said clinical trials.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, did you have a personal? Where did you? Because for someone to go out of their way, I'm sure this happens all the time where universities are not fully compliant, but they may not have employees that actually go out of their way to blow the whistle. What makes you different? Why? What's your personal connection to this?
Well, personally, I think everybody knows somebody or has a loved one, I think, that's affected by cancer in some way. Cancer is universal, it doesn't discriminate. And, in my personal family, we've lost several people, to different forms of cancer. So the personal connection is definitely there. In terms of what was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of my coming forward, it wasn't really a personal decision. It was I was asked to lie about a computerized system for the management of the biorepository that I worked at. And specifically, my manager came up to me and asked me to start sending out these weekly updates about a computerized system I knew was not in use and was not functional. And it was that initial disclosure about that database system that basically opened the floodgates. And then once I realized what I had done, that I had essentially blown the whistle, then I decided, it wasn't appropriate to cherry pick things to blow the whistle about, but to come forward with everything that I knew. And that happened.
I have a question for you. How does that database, in this case I like to call it the imaginary database, how would that impact the study?
The database basically was used to supposedly track all of the biospecimens, so any of the blood or the tissue that would have been donated from the patient enrolled on that clinical trial. It was basically a biorepository inventory management system. Without getting into the specifics of each of the biospecimens, basically an inventory system so that we would know what we had in the biorepository at any given point, from any of the patients.
So you were basically being asked to make up that information?
Basically it had been kept in spreadsheets before, and pulling information from those spreadsheets was often a futile task, I guess you could say. And I guess with my studies, I went down and physically verified the inventory for all of my protocols so that I knew, but I maintained that in my spreadsheets. But that was the whole, discussion is, did we need this database system, or were Excel spreadsheets sufficient for, the purposes of that computerized system? And my argument was that I had no problems doing my work with Excel, but you introduced the database system and you introduced a whole nother issue, a whole other set of issues that made my job much more difficult at the end of the day.
Okay.
And you bring up a good point, because people who get involved in clinical research as a career, for the most part, I'm not talking about the big wigs and the big shots, but for the most part, they don't do it for the money. They do it, of course it's a career that they're interested in, but they do it also for a sense of getting some kind of satisfaction, helping advance medicine, right? So for you, this must have been kind of a blow where you said, man, it's not like I'm getting paid that much, and then I feel like I'm not contributing to advancing
not only am I not contributing, but my actions may actually be, hurting the overall goal of finding a cure and helping people and improving survival. And that's the point where I decided, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to come forward. I'm going to make these disclosures, and I'm pretty sure they're going to retaliate against me for doing it. But in the end, hopefully, what we will have learned from all of this will outweigh, the personal negative impacts that I've suffered as a result. And it's a long-term goal in mind. But I think, even now that we're having these discussions about the drug shortages, is a sign that this is working. People are paying more attention, and it's becoming increasingly more relevant. So, I think, in that regard, you have to look at it as a victory. I may be losing a bunch of court cases, but at the same time, we've opened up conversations that needed to be had and that affect people's lives and, their quality of lives.
And it sounds like, too, just even looking at this from a management perspective, it sounds like the leadership of that management was taking a lazy approach to this whole thing. And that's what it came down to. Instead of just coming forward and either making a decision themselves or where they're going to use this based on the input that they've got from yourself, and I'm guessing others who are utilizing this system, on which is the best outcome and which is the most efficient outcome. And if they felt like the database was better, regardless of what you guys were saying, they should have just implemented it and made sure that the data was downloaded in it instead of just trying to fantasize it and push that into the face of the, I'm guessing, the sponsors to say, hey, look, we have this in place and we're utilizing it. And that's what I'm hearing. Am I correct?
Yeah, and I mean, they were representing to the National Cancer Institute that this database system was, in fact, in use and operational, and that I would have had much less issue had the database system actually worked. Even if I didn't think it was the better choice as opposed to maintaining the data in spreadsheets, basically I was being asked to completely lie about this system that was. And I wrote a 3-page document in which I explained the inherent design flaws in the system as to why it was never going to work. Because the people, and this is a pretty common theme in some of these bigger, like federally funded projects, the people at the top who make these policies have no idea of what the people at the bottom are doing, and how the workflow actually goes, and how mandating use of a computerized system could actually hurt what everyone's trying to accomplish. Whereas the intentions may be great, there's such a disconnect between the policymakers and the people doing the legwork. That at the end of the day, I think, sometimes for people like me at the bottom, I'm like, how did they even think this was a good idea? But if you've never done the legwork and you don't know what that entails, it's really hard to design systems to optimize that workflow.
Yeah, I hear you. You hit on a key point too. We run into that too, and I've seen it over the years with the design of a lot of studies. And when I look at the actual subjects that are going to participate in the studies, and you look at the design of the study, and you're wondering if whoever's designing these studies has ever met any of the subjects that they're designing the study for.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a good segue into this issue of the chemo drug shortages, because one of the potential mitigating factors that has been proposed is, of course, a computerized system now to track and monitor the drug shortages and where they're occurring. And this is something that within weeks people have been saying, well, maybe we need a computerized system to look at that. And for me, this is a whole nother opportunity to say, maybe let's shy away from the database system and let's look at collaborative spreadsheets that could be used by multiple agencies like the FDA, like the NIH, like the NCI, instead of each agency having their own system, that never cooperate well with, the systems of the other agencies. Rather just doing a big collaborative spreadsheet that everybody can access and is maintained in a transparent way. Because when you do things transparently, there's a lot less chance of things going awry, I feel like, when everything's disclosed and available for public viewing.
Yeah, now let's talk. It's a good segue. Tell us and tell our audience members, and also myself and Don, because we know a little bit about this drug shortage, but tell us a little bit about it, like from a beginner's perspective.
So basically, a lot of cancer patients, we can look at the chemo issue because that's one of the big ones. A lot of patients today, especially with the early stage cancers, go through chemotherapy regimens. And pretty much going back to at least my work in 2008, there have been these critical drug shortages, whether it be for therapies that are still in clinical trials or whether it be for approved therapies. They are having these shortage issues where, the patients and the protocol medicine, that's dictated by these protocol documents, all of that is affected because there's not enough access. Like you said, when they actually wrote these studies, they were assuming that they had, enough chemotherapy, to go through all these regimens. Well, it turns out a lot of times now they're having major shortages of a lot of the big commonly used chemo drugs, and doctors are having to ration supplies. They're having to prioritize patients in terms of who gets the treatment and who doesn't, based on these drug shortages alone, which that's scary. People's lives, in some cases, depend on the availability of these drugs. And what the FDA and what some of government has been saying is that what is lacking is the ability to proactively do anything about these shortages. Now in February, a bill was introduced, and I believe it was passed, that mandates that the manufacturers inform the FDA of any shortages. But I mean, basically, it does little to address anything in the long term, and it's dealing with just, short term notifying the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
And notifying the FDA is a great step, but notifying the FDA doesn't equate to a solution to, the problem. Obviously, FDA needs to know so that, they can have a better handle on the situation. And even the people who wrote the bill, very interesting, they admit that this bill does very little to address the long-term issues with the drug shortage problem.
So is this a case of people just being clueless or a little lazy about what's going on, or is this intentional? Because to me, it doesn't make sense for pharma to not have enough drugs to sell.
Well, and this is the issue, and this is what I think we need to focus on. Basically, right now, they're looking at the prescription drug supply chain as, as the grounds for where this problem is originating. And what I'm saying is where this problem originates is the patent law. The United States Title 35, which governs patents in this country. Mm-hmm. And it's a problem that has to do with patentable subject matter and the patent protection of drugs and the intellectual property rights, of those drugs and how that affects the market. But that's where I think, rather than talking about, there's the manufacturing aspect, and I think that people could use the drug shortage to advocate for more domestic big pharma manufacturing, which could potentially create a lot of jobs in this country and good paying jobs. Because, for example, when drugs are manufactured in China, we have very little control over what happens over there. So by bringing it stateside, we would have a much better handle on all aspects of the manufacturing of these drugs. But like I said, the manufacturing, that's just one issue. The issue is, why are the companies running out of drugs? Well, if the patent protection of that drug has expired, pharma's not going to make a lot of money off that drug. And so the financial incentive to make that drug pretty much goes out the window.
Right.
And so it all depends on once the drug manufacturer gets the drug approved, they have a certain amount of time where it's under patent protection where they can recover their research and development costs, essentially. Mm-hmm. And once they do that, and once the patent protection of that drug wears off such that generics can be introduced, a lot of times the manufacturers just stop making the brand names. Because, and a lot of people in the industry don't want to say, oh, by the way, we stopped making these drugs because we just don't make a lot of money off them. Nobody in their right mind is going to come out and say that.
Right.
But I think that's what's really happening.
So you're saying they can use this as a loophole to say, well, there's a shortage. It doesn't make sense for us to put the extra efforts to get the drugs out in time, and they kind of just conveniently forget about it?
Well, not that they conveniently forget about it, but I think that the whole approval process and the way that drugs are developed and the money that goes into the research and development and the monies that have to be recouped after that, if the drug does in fact get approval, which a lot of times, these drugs don't even pass, kind of like drilling for oil, you hit oil sometimes and sometimes you don't. So, you have to factor all that in. But I think the financial incentive, pertaining to brand names as opposed to generics in terms of the intellectual property argument, I think that's where the true problem lies. And I think maybe, if you were to give the intellectual property rights back to the inventors as opposed to having them being owned by the companies, and of course the effects of that would be widespread, and I'm sure people, would fear that in some regards. But it's a similar issue in the federally funded research, and it's an issue in one of my lawsuits. Ohio State says that they own my research under the Federal Bayh-Dole Act, which gives universities intellectual property rights to inventions created using federal funding. And now that is part of Title 35, which governs patents in this country.
Okay.
So I basically have raised a constitutional question on that, but it's all interrelated. Is who owns this stuff, and does a company own it? Does the university own it? And what happens, when the inventors don't own it? An inventor can't say, well, I invented this drug to help people, so we're going to make it regardless of if it makes a certain profit margin or not. Whereas a personal inventor might look at it that way, Big Pharma is going to look at it strictly from a profit margin point of view.
I think it's an excellent point. That's the argument we've always had too, is where you've got the split between the sort of the business sector and the scientific sector. And the scientific sector, as you just shared, I think a lot of people get into that business, just like you have some doctors that might go into becoming an MD because they really want to help people. You have scientists that get into this that want to develop these drugs because they really want to help people and either find cures or find ways to control the medication. But then you have the business sector, and I think you get this struggle of who's controlling that whole arena. And I think there needs to be a happy balance. I don't think the business guy needs to completely control it, because you're right, because it could be throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
I think you're right. And actually, this morning I was thinking about that and just toying around in my head the idea, well, what if you initially gave the intellectual property rights to the pharmaceutical company? But what if after the patent protection for that drug expires, you shift the rights back to the inventor rather than to, a pharmaceutical company? Because that way the inventor could even, use that to create a new business. If they have a drug they know works, even if it's not going to make, big pharma profit margins, it might be worth it for a small company to invest, to start up, to manufacture that drug, to establish the supply lines, establish the connections, and then they could possibly, grow into their own, pharmaceutical company.
Right.
So I was kind of thinking this morning, maybe that's a conversation we need to have. What would happen if, once the patent protection for brand name drugs expires, if we shifted the intellectual property rights back to the investors? And I can tell you right now that there is constitutional authority to make that move under the Fifth Amendment.
Wow. And it makes sense because, different companies have different core competencies. So what may be profitable for one company may not be profitable for another, or one company may know how to make a specific niche product profitable, and another big company may not know what to do with it. So in this case, you're getting a profitable company that knows what they're doing with that specific product to actually help the people who may need that drug. Makes sense to me.
And it also creates economy too.
And that's the win-win of it. But of course, I have to make the disclosure that I am not an attorney. I've been spending a lot of time on Google, and I've read a lot of cases. But at the same time, I'm still not an attorney.
Right.
And so I think, everyone can take my legal opinions for what they're worth within that context.
Now, speaking of attorney, do you have legal representation since you're involved in all these cases, or are you defending yourself?
I'm completely pro se, so I'm completely representing myself, which is why the workload is what it is.
Right. Now,
Because I just don't have any paralegals or, any help in that regard.
Walk us through this a little. What's your typical day like?
I pretty much just spend the vast majority of the day either writing motions or doing more legal research.
Oh, man.
And it's amazing what you can learn online if you're so inclined.
Right.
And if you start just learning what you need to Google, just if you have an idea, well, I want to write, say, a motion to compel. Well, Google that. You start there, and then you find the case law, and you read the rules, and it's how it all starts. But the vast majority of my day is just me in front of my computer with Google.
And this is totally off topic, but have you found any, I guess, legal gurus? I think there's an opportunity for a lawyer out there to kind of create a blog or even create a show like we do where they can help people. Have you found any? I'm just curious.
On Twitter, there is, I know a lawyer, Dan Vorhaus or something. His Twitter handle is @genomics-lawyer.
Okay.
And they have a blog called the Genomics Law Report. And it is one of the most well-written blogs I've seen in a long time, because not only do they provide all the actual court documents, they hyperlink everything so that you can see the actual opinions themselves, but it's a collaborative blog, so they have a lot of authors, and I really think it's probably one of the best blogs out there where they do talk about things like patentable subject matter, within pharmaceuticals and, within the medical realm. So, yeah, definitely Genomics Law Report. I would definitely recommend reading that.
Good. Yeah, and there's another one we interviewed. His Twitter handle is @FDA Lawyers.
Oh, yeah.
I just pulled that up, Genomics
Yeah,
Law Report.
oh, there you go. Yeah, you got it on the iPhone there.
Yeah.
Sarah, back to clinical research. The whole argument for federally funded trials is to kind of develop drugs without necessarily having commercial interests be the number one priority, right? Do you see that model is succeeding? Or do you, because obviously most trials now are done, with private companies, such as South Coast Clinical Trials, working on drugs that are made by Big Pharma, obviously for profit. But as far as the university model and the NIH model, do you think that model is broken, or do you think there's still something there that can provide value?
I definitely think that parts of the system are salvageable, but I think that they waste a lot of time and money on programs which have already proven themselves to be somewhat obsolete, like some of the biospecimen banking activities that go along with that, that is funded by federal money. A lot of it's duplicative. A lot of it has been made obsolete by new research. And my issue is that when they identify those programs, getting anyone to review those programs and potentially eliminate those programs is like mission impossible. And I mean, I've personally dealt with this with my lawsuits, and I have been bounced from the NCI to the Department of Health and Human Services to the CDC. I have a collection of letters from a plethora of high-ranking officials, basically all stating that, maybe someday we'll get around to looking into this. And to me, I'm like, well, this is not acceptable. You can't wait another 6 years when, there's $50 million being thrown into this program.
Right.
To some people that's chump change, but to me that's money that could be, put elsewhere and, used to other research that's more meaningful at the end of the day.
And it makes you wonder, with all these public projects, here in San Bernardino, these guys, these people who fix the roads, just a small example. 1 week they're digging a hole, and the next week they're covering it up. It seems like they're just giving themselves things to do, right?
No, here's a good example.
Well, that's a great point. In a lot of the work that I did, a lot of times people were employed to sit there for when the work came around.
That's what
Rather than employing people, bringing in people when there's overflow, to do stuff and there's a lot of situations where that is feasible. You don't need, high level of training to enter data into Excel. You can be taught to do that relatively easily, but in some of these cases, they have people sitting there for 40 hours a week to really only do 5 or 10 hours of work a week, just so that they're there. And there's no incentive within the universities to eradicate these jobs or to lessen their funding in any way. You never ever want to talk about like receiving less funding. That's like a huge no-no. So, there are things within the system that make the system function, a lot less well, I guess you could say, just because of the way that it's set up. And people just are a lot of times unwilling to embrace change or just think it's too hard, to overhaul the system. I'm not one of those people. I'm saying let's take what's broken and let's fix it. And let's leave what's working in place and let it work.
If you had a corporation, you're always looking for more efficient ways of trying to get things done to either stabilize costs or reduce costs. And I can't see why it can't be done the same in the government sector when you're dealing with these kind of projects.
You're absolutely right, but the reality is it's always talking about more funding, at least in the bare minimum, maintaining the level of funding that they currently have, and it's always talking about what can we do to get more funding. So that's, to me, that's like the most obvious thing to address. Let's just stop all this ridiculous wasteful spending, and then, let's see where we're at.
Yeah, there's a lot of waste. You don't have to look any further than a street near you. There's a guy digging a hole. Oh, yes, another guy looking down the hole.
Just to fill it up, yeah.
Well, there's another guy standing right next to him looking down the hole, but doing nothing. And then there's another guy holding a newspaper and one of those signs for the cars. And then another guy watching him.
Exactly.
But you'll love this. In Ohio, the people doing the road work are brought in from Indiana. I kid you not. We can't even get our own people to do that here. We have to bring them in.
That's Don's home state, too.
Well, it's Columbus sometimes.
Oh, Columbus. Yeah, Sarah's out there, right?
Yeah.
I'm in Columbus. We literally...
Oh, you're in Columbus?
My friend of mine was like, you need to blow the whistle on that. They're bringing in road workers from Indiana.
Wow.
I have to talk to my cousin, because I have a cousin that one of the jobs he had was to go out to make sure, because I guess there was a law that construction could only start at a certain time in the morning. And
I'm sure, yeah.
His job was, I think, to drive around to the different locations to make sure that they're not starting before the official start time.
It's a good job. Good job to have. Wow. Well, Sarah, this is just an example of the waste. So, where do you stand right now with your cases? Are there any that are nearing completion, or what's going on?
No, I'm pretty much appealing the vast majority of my cases, with the exception of the claim that has to do with the Bayh-Dole Act, ironically. They are going to let me, it looks like, challenge the constitutionality of that act, because that is the act, I guess you could say, that was used in the plagiarism and or taking of my intellectual property, depending on the text.
Send us a link to that act, and I'll post it on the blog underneath this video for the viewers to read more about.
Yeah, there's, you can definitely read more about it for people interested in the legal complexities. I'm more than happy to speak about it, but I don't want to lose the base audience by, going into the ins and outs of the legal arguments in the case. But it does have to do, with federally funded research and the implications if I'm successful, which, the chances of that are slim to none realistically, but still, I'm going to try. Right. And if I am successful, the implications of intellectual property rights in terms of federally funded research, there could be some changes on the horizon.
Don, any closing remarks as we wrap up?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit here. It's always an interesting topic. I just wish you all the success in the world.
Oh, thank you, and to you guys as well. And hopefully, now that maybe people will look at the drug shortage issue within the realm of patent law, maybe we can start a whole other conversation now that that door has been opened.
It's a very interesting dialogue. Sarah, you are a hero because change only happens when people like you speak up. Otherwise, things would just stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
So we need more people like you. And if you want to get in touch with Sarah, she's got a Twitter. She's pretty active there. And I'll post the links there on the blog when this is up on the website. And Sarah, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you guys for providing me with a portal to the world so that I don't have to just sit at home and deal with these thoughts in my mind, but I can actually tell it to people who might actually be able to do something with it.
Yeah, we need to spread the word.
And you see, I have my Buckeye colors on, scarlet and gray.
Scarlet and gray, baby. Go Bucks.
Oh, man.
5 yards in a cloud of dust. All righty.
Well, this is Dan and Dawn signing off. Thank you again, Sarah, from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Thanks a lot.